With the recent announcement of Ngannou's return in the PFL, there was a fight between Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya. And this particular fight was advertised and promoted with a lot of race baiting. We have Dricus du Plessis from South Africa, a white man. Look up the history, but born and raised in South Africa. And we have Israel Adesanya from Nigeria. Both of these gentlemen, Dricus du Plessis, DDP from here on out, and Israel Adesanya pushed that racial agenda. DDP by saying he's gonna be the first champion a real African champion to reside and still remain in Africa after becoming champion. And of course, we got Israel Adesanya at one point trying to spoil a victory on the post-fight interview of DDP by going up there and saying, "What's up, my drop N-word," continuously over and over and over again. All of this petty race baiting to build up this fight is in poor taste to me. On both ends, I heard a few times that they're just glad that they are in such a position to be able to encourage and inspire, and that they're happy to be the trailblazers of future African athletes. And it's almost as if they carry this torch proudly. But there's something to be said about that, given the fact that the UFC did dirty tactics to erase Francis Ngannou from the roster and history of the UFC. Given the fact that Ngannou was also a champion, and that the UFC is going at great lengths to just kind of little by little let him fade into nothingness, for people to forget about him, is kind of crazy. I do agree with Israel on that. I've been watching the UFC for a long time. Since the early 2000s is when I really got into it, and watched some of it as a young teenager in the late 90s. With that, I remember a lot of forgotten faces. The very same thing that Israel's fighting for, to not be forgotten, to not be erased from history. I remember a gentleman by the name of Trevor Prangley. Trevor Prangley came in to the UFC, the big times, okay? And let me emphasize the UFC, because that is the promotion that's up there. If you make it to the UFC, you're in the big leagues. And I clearly remember him. I have never forgotten about him, because he's from South Africa. And it was heavily emphasized that he's an African fighter in the UFC, putting Africa on the map. Trevor Prangley was born in Cape Town, South Africa. And later on in his life, he moved to the United States, to Idaho, to pursue a wrestling career, a collegiate wrestling career. I believe he got injured, and with that, his direction of wrestling, sports in general, switched over to MMA. I remember him because I remember his brute strength. I remember watching him fight Curtis Stout, I believe was the guy's name. And Trevor Prangley was able to defeat him by submission with a head and arm choke, much like Mark Coleman did to Dan Severn. He went on to fight the likes of Jeremy Horn, Chael Sonnen, and although he fell short, I do remember thinking, that's a powerful dude right there. You can tell that this guy is very, very strong. Around this time, my brother and I were huge MMA fans. Not just UFC, but we were already watching the Elite XCs, the Pride FCs, you name it. And as Trevor Prangley was released from the UFC, we actually followed his career. And not just him, but other ones. But we're gonna make this video about Trevor Prangley, since people forgot about the true African pioneer to put Africa in the map and really be the trailblazer for African fighters. I was such a fan of every athlete that stepped into the big time. So if I saw you like in the Elite XC or the UFC, at one point or another, I researched you. I looked up where you were born, your records, what organizations you had fought for, and the same was for Trevor Prangley. I was pretty impressed with him, and I for some reason I just honestly never forgot about him. His soft voice, his calm demeanor, but when he got in there, he's just this powerful tank of a wrestler. Check this out. I even bought Shark Fights 13. I believe it was 2010 or 2011. On September 11th, the very day that I'm recording today, I bought Shark Fights 13 with my brother just to watch him as the main event versus Keith Jardine.
Squaring off against the hard-hitting South African, Trevor Prangley.
This fight is do or die for both of us.
Both of these fighters have fought the best in the world.
Both have faced very, very good opponents.
A lot of tough guys.
But they've never faced each other.
And what a blast it was. Only $30. Got ourselves some good pizza. We had a co-main event. Ramiro Sokoju versus Houston Alexander. We had Jorge Masvidal versus Paul Semtex Daly. We had Villaseñor. The card wasn't that bad. Not to mention the hilarious audio team, Boss Rutan and Don Fry. And this event took place in Texas, so you can already imagine the laugh, the commentating, the fights were good. And like I mentioned, most importantly, we were supporting these fighters with our wallet. My brother and I also went to Strikeforce Las Vegas, I believe 2010, 2011, shortly after the Shark Fights. Or maybe it was right before that, I can't quite remember. But Trevor Prangley, we went there live to watch the likes of Renato Sobro versus Robbie Lawler as the main event. But also, and I kid you not, my brother and I would talk a lot in the sense of, and bonus, Trevor Prangley's gonna be there. Unfortunately for us, being Trevor Prangley fans, he lost within a minute or two. He fought Tim Kennedy. That was the first time we came across Tim Kennedy. But nonetheless, we were already talking about Trevor Prangley, the hardcores. We knew who Trevor Prangley was. We knew he was African. And he put Africa on the map because it is us, the hardcores, that are going to be talking about you. The fighters that get overlooked by the casuals, right? Which there's plenty of casuals nowadays. But it's us, the hardcore fans, that pretty much knew everybody that would push. Oh yeah, this guy's from here. Oh yeah, the Alessio Sakara's from Italy. They got a clean ass boxer, Alessio Sakara. You know, Trevor Prangley, that's a badass wrestler from Africa. Dude's in the UFC, fought in the UFC at least. You know, champion of Shark Fights. Fought for Strikeforce. Stuff of that nature. We can sell it to people. It's us. And I remember selling Trevor Prangley in that same sense. I know that a lot of people are going to say, well, Israel Adesanya was pushing that agenda as the Three Kings because they were champions. Kamaru Usman, Francis Ngannou, and Israel Adesanya. True. But I'm talking more of a pioneer, a guy that's trailblazed, that he paved the way. What I'm trying to bring to light right now is that Israel Adesanya, Francis Ngannou, and Kamaru Usman were not the people to pave the way for other African fighters. The true pioneer here at a mainstream level was Trevor Prangley. Not to mention he had a decent team backing him up. When he came over, he pretty much joined AKA. And a lot of people like Mendes, Cain Velasquez, you name it, talking very highly and with a lot of respect towards Trevor Prangley.
Really well-rounded, very powerful hands, his powerful kicks, good throws too. Extremely powerful in the wrestling department.
He'll take two to get one. The guy that you hit with everything that you got, and he just looks at.
And to bring to the light and a reminder, a little bit of MMA history, is that Trevor Prangley was the first African, he was the pioneer for African fighters. at a mainstream level with the big times, the big organizations, the UFCs, the Strikeforce, the Bellators. Trevor Prangley was the first to do it all. And as I mentioned, went everywhere. Not just the UFC, but Strikeforce and Bellator. 185s, 205s, heavyweights, it didn't matter. I saw him pretty much go everywhere and fight everybody during his era of MMA. But the true pioneer for the mainstream, what the MMA that we know today, is Trevor Prangley. And quite honestly, it's time to start putting some respect on that name.